So it's, her name is Lisa also.
I want to welcome you this evening. It's National Library Week, as you may have heard on the overhead. And I thought, what better way to have a special program than to have Candace come and talk about Clara Louise Kessler. She was children's librarian for Withers Public Library for 33 years. And of course, you know, Withers was the predecessor to Bloomington Public Library. And I'm out of breath, so excuse me. Too much rushing. This evening we're going to explore Miss Kessler's life, her impact on the community, and she had quite an impact, and her contributions to our local history. This program has evolved out of the 2015 Cemetery Walk presentation on Miss Kessler, and it is being recorded with the intent to post it on our library's website. So, our presenter this evening is Candace Summers. She's the Director of Education at the McLean County Museum of History, where she has worked for 10 years. Each year, Candace helps to educate over 14,000 people, including children, in central Illinois through educational programs like the Evergreen Cemetery Walk. About 7,000 of those individuals are school children who receive in-depth educational programs free of charge. Candace has over a decade of experience working in museum education with age groups ranging from K through 12, as well as adults, and over 12 years of historical research experience. She has extensive leadership and training experience and has helped other museums and organizations launch their own cemetery walks. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Archaeology from the University of Evansville in Evansville, Indiana. And she has obtained a Master of History in 2006 from Illinois State University. Candace?
Thank you. So again, thank you all for having me today, and I'm really excited to share Clara Louise Kessler with you, although I know there's some people in the audience who actually knew Miss Kessler. So I'm really excited about that because I love to get to talk to people that knew people from the cemetery walk, which does not happen very often. Most of the people we feature on our event long since gone. So it is a real treat when we actually find people that knew the people that we bring back to life and also tell us, you got it right. And so that's really special. So like Karen said, Clara had a long career, and actually she was known as Louise to most. And she was at the library for 33 years, and she had a huge impact on people, especially children. And so as I was digging around looking for information about Louise, first for the cemetery walk and then for this presentation, I kept finding more and more and more, and I could spend probably hours talking about her because there's just so much information. And I'm sure if I keep poking around on the internet, which is a fabulous yet dangerous, addictive place for researchers, I could keep finding more on her. This picture right here is Louise during an event, which I'll talk about a little later, at Withers Public Library at that time. And two of her young patrons, the McNabb siblings, and I came up with this title, actually my department came up with this title, it was a group effort, because you have to be a reader to be a writer. And some of this program, I have a lot of direct quotes from her, so I'm going to be doing some reading because I don't want to mess up her own words because she was such an eloquent writer and an eloquent speaker. I have a few poems of hers to share as well because there's lots of them. And I picked out, I think, some of my favorites and hopefully her favorites and will become your favorites. So Louise knows and loves children and is vitally interested in them, said an actress of stage and screen, Jane Cowell, after reading Kessler's poetry. Louise had a lifelong interest in books, songs, and children, and she began her career of working with children as a kindergarten teacher before she entered the library career in 1919. At Withers Public Library, which is today, as we know, Bloomington Public Library. Her mission was to not only present the very best children's literature and encourage its enjoyment, but to create an environment which would stimulate children's imaginations, encourage children to freely express themselves, and help children grow into adults that would help build a better Bloomington. In addition to fulfilling the literary and creative needs of the children of the community, she was dedicated to preserving our local history too, which we'll talk about these wonderful 5 volumes of history a little bit later. Louise has roots in Illinois in a town called Warren. In Warren, Illinois, which is just up on the Wisconsin and Illinois border. And I put a little star next to where Normal is so you can see how far she kind of made her journey with her family. She was one of 3 children born to Samuel and Martha Kessler. She had an older sister, Frances, who has an equally fascinating career as a music teacher, and then a younger brother named Louis. The Kessler family moved to Warren because of Louise's grandfather, who was a pharmacist, and decided to pick up the family from Pennsylvania and move to Warren in 1867. Her grandfather had a pharmacy on Main Street in Warren, and yes, this is Warren's Main Street. I'm not exactly sure where the pharmacy would have been, because I was very fortunate and found this picture postcard on eBay so I could snag a scan of it. We love eBay for so many things. And so her father, Samuel, actually started learning the trade of being a pharmacist when he was 15 and eventually took over her father's pharmacy in 1881. And the reason I'm talking about her pharmacy is she has such wonderful memories about her early childhood living in Warren and that pharmacy. And she wrote about them and included them in those books. Even though those pharmacies weren't in Bloomington-Normal, they still had an impact on her. She liked to talk about how when her grandfather ran the pharmacy, there was no soda fountain, there was lemonade, and there was a big glass jar with a dipper that you scooped out your lemonade for a nickel a cup. And occasionally, lemon juice and sugar were added to keep the lemonade up to par, according to her. When her father took over, an elaborate marble soda fountain was added, and soda was dispensed at a nickel a glass. There was a long table in the center of the room filled with patent medicines to one side, and other bottles of various shapes and sizes with who knows what wonders inside of them. Her father made his own vanilla extract, and she also described in exquisite detail the pharmacy right down to the beautiful brass balancing scales on an upright pedestal, on the mahogany prescription counter, and the 3 different kinds of mortar and pestles he used to create his concoctions. But when her father was a young man, he found his way to Bloomington-Normal. His father sent him to Bloomington-Normal because there was a meeting of the state, a meeting to establish a state board of pharmacy. And while he was in Normal, he took a sightseeing tour by the horse railway and explored Normal, and it left such an impression on him that he wanted to move his family back in 1897. It was her parents' hope that their children could attend schools where the celebrated Normal University was. Let's see. So they moved to Normal in 1897. Her father found a job at Lower's drugstore in Normal, and they rented a house on Ash Street, and they lived in Normal for about 5 years. This very dark, kind of grainy picture is actually Louise, right in the center with the arrow, and I think she's about 10 there, and she was the mascot for Normal High School's girls basketball team. and she's holding the basketball. It's 1903. I don't know what the mascot did, but I thought it was just a fun photograph. And she actually contributed this photograph for the centennial of Normal in 1965, I believe. And yeah, 1965. And so she wanted to help share her history as well in Normal, even though she didn't live there very long. So they moved to Bloomington, and her father got a job at Fishbeck's drugstore, located at 113 South Center Street, and the family settled near the old Ben Funk home, which is Gailey's Eye Institute now, at 1004 Main Street. And digging around in our archives, I actually found a photo of the 100 block of South Center Street, and I want to say this might be the drugstore there. Not entirely sure. This is from about the right era, from about 1910. where there's a fun carnival going on and somebody's selling fireworks too. But yeah, I'm pretty confident that might be where her father worked. But he worked in pharmacies all over town. And Louise finished her education at Franklin School on Park Street, and then eventually at the old Bloomington High School. Not the old Bloomington High School, but the old one, over on Monroe Street, which is not that far from where my husband and I live. But Louise, she had a creative bug throughout her entire life, and it really started to show itself in high school. In 1910, she was the assistant to the stage manager for the annual Senior Dramatic Exposition, otherwise known as a play. And the play was called One of Eight, and it was a play about school life and the trials and tribulations of students at a particular university that went unnamed. Not sure if maybe they were talking about our universities here in town, but we all know school life is filled with trials and tribulations. Later in life, Kessler credited her family for her interest in creative arts. She had a lifelong love and appreciation for music. Again, more stories in her books over here. But one story that she told was that her father would like to tell her the story about finding musical instruments in his family's home in Pennsylvania. And these instruments belonged to his uncles, which was his mom's brothers, who fought in the Civil War. And Louise wrote that these musical instruments formed a bridge from unknown musical ancestry to the present in her mind. Her grandfather played the flute and led the choir at his church in Pennsylvania before he moved to Warren, and again led the choir church there. Her father played the horn in the village band. And the family formed their own orchestra. You know, this is the time before TV and radio, so you got to have something to do, so everybody learned a musical instrument. And her father, Samuel, played the flute, which was his dad's. Her sister Frances played the piano. Her brother Louis was the first violin, and mother was the second violin. And Clara Louise herself played the cello. And as a small girl, I can imagine how tall that cello might have been on her. While Louise never made a career out of music, she did not leave that heritage behind. She wrote lyrics for songs, several of which her sister Frances composed the music for. And this picture right here, which a lot of the images I'm going to be showing tonight came from the Pantograph. The museum is very fortunate and has the negative collection donated by the Pantograph, and so that's how we're able to find these fabulous photos. Also, Karen was really great and let me pick through their scrapbooks here, and so I have some images from that as well. But this picture right here is Louise and her sister Frances, and they're playing at the Association of Childhood Education party. And I don't know the song that they were singing, but it was composed by the sisters there.
Her sister was an amazing teacher.
Yes, she was. I have found a lot of, Frances is on my radar for the cemetery walk. She would be another fabulous person to do as well, because she had a long musical career. 50 of Louise's song lyrics appeared in a school book series called The World of Music. And if anybody has a copy of that book, I would love to see it, because I've been digging for ages to find her books that she was published in. And 25 more of her lyrics appeared in the song anthology Music for Living. She also wrote lyrics for the Alice in Wonderland suite by Edgar Stillman Kelly, which I found her copyright in 1925 for those lyrics. Now, I also actually found the lyrics. Again, our wonderful friend, Mr. Google, has been kind enough to share with me some wonderful things. And the Alice in Wonderland suite was actually performed at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and it was May 22nd, 1925. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing because that would take a long time. But I will read you one section on the white rabbit. Now comes the small white rabbit, 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 so dainty and so stylish in his little waistcoat neat. He evidently flurried, flurried, flurried. Indeed, he's more than worried, for his terror is complete. A watch from out of his pocket now the rabbit doth display. His nerves are on attention. He cried, if I have kept the Duchess waiting on the way, 'tis 'cause for awful apprehension. I was to see the Duchess here, but glancing at my watch, I fear 'tis getting late, my gloves are lost. The lady's punctuality endangers my vitality, a terrible reality, I'm tardy to my cost. Oh, my dear paws, oh, my ears and whiskers, 'tis true I'm in a flurry, flurry, flurry. The Duchess makes me worry, and I'm whiter than a sheet, for she will have my head off, head off, head off, and yes, she'll have my head off, and my ruin will be complete. So that was fun. And if you want to read more of it, you can stay afterwards, because the rest of it is really cute too. And Kessler credits especially her mother and her grandmother for her interest in handwork, like sewing and knitting and crocheting and tatting. She has fond memories of her grandmother's handiwork. She recalled that her grandmother, whose name is Roxy Ann, sat down even just a minute. If she was not reading or had something in her hand, she was busy knitting. And Kessler recalled the click and clack of the needles as she was sitting there doing her knitting. The first handwork Kessler recalls making as a young girl was hem-stitching handkerchiefs. And she was proud that she was the only one in her family that knew how to tat, which for those of you who don't know what tatting is, it's lace making. Louise also knitted for soldiers during the First World War and later crocheted carpet warp for table runners and piano tops. Later in life, about 1950, when these books came out, Kessler wrote, "Modern amusements do not encourage handwork among young people today. So many hours are spent listening to the radio, looking at movies, or riding in the family car. Even 10 to 15 years ago, boys were making their own radio or telegraph sets, and girls were sewing doll clothes or making their own paper dolls. Now everything is ready-made. Hands are less cunning. Perhaps during the next 50 years, it might be a good idea to start a back-to-handcraft movement in Bloomington. There is something very wonderful in creating a piece of handwork. Every child should have one or two crafts for his very own enjoyment." I think she was a little prophetic there. I am an avid knitter, sewer, beater. You name it, I probably do it, and my husband can attest to the fact that I have a large crafting collection at home. Kessler went on to study at Illinois State Normal University and studied to be a kindergarten primary school teacher, and she graduated in June 1915. These are some postcards that I found that are about the appropriate time period of when she would have attended school there. And immediately upon graduation, or actually she had accepted a position a few months before graduation, she began her first teaching job at the Day Nursery and Settlement Association here in Bloomington. The modern Milestones Early Learning Center is what the Day Nursery is today, still going strong. The Day Nursery was founded in 1908 by a group of women in Bloomington who felt they needed to do something worthwhile for mothers who were obliged to work away from home during the day and who had to keep their older children out of school to take care of young children that were too young for school. And the Day Nursery was a safe place for working mothers to leave their children who were not of school age, thus allowing the older children to attend school and not get further behind. There was both a kindergarten and a nursery department at the Day Nursery, and Ms. Kessler ran a very orderly classroom. During her first year, it was reported that the children in her class not only were interested and happy, but under most excellent control. She averaged 37 students each day, and they were all taught obedience, cleanliness, and manners. In addition to being an efficient teacher, she also added activities that promoted the growth and creativity among her pupils. One of the things that they pointed out in a newspaper article was the fact that she expanded and improved upon the Christmas party that the Day Nursery would have every year for all the children and their mothers at the home. And if you can imagine a Christmas party with kids, there's a tree decorated, there's candy, there's Santa, a little present, maybe singing some songs. Well, for Miss Kessler, she decorated the entire house, it was said. She had trinkets and candy for the kids. She also told a story, and each child received a gift and a candy cane. But the piece de resistance for her party was a toy orchestra that the children made up. This story in Kindergarten Primary Magazine appeared after she had her Christmas party and talks about her toy symphony. So I was able to compare what was written in the Panagraph with what was written as a big national story. This party was said to be the largest ever held, and children ages 3 to 6 played on instruments such as the violin, the mandolin, the drum, the accordion, the tambourine, and the bells. So you can imagine 3 to 6-year-olds clanging away on all those instruments. It was probably a really, really good time for the kids. And every year she worked at the day nursery, they had similar parties every Christmas. It was also during this time that, again, she was publishing poetry. Now, most of her poetry and writing were published locally in the Panagraph. If you have access to newspapers.com, or if you come here and you have your library card, you can look at newspapers.com here in the library. You can go to the Panagraph, just type in her last name, and you'll have hundreds of articles all about her and her writings and what she was doing here at the library. And there's so many just really cute, sweet stories all about kids and what it was like growing up, but also lessons that children need to learn as well. And one of her publications, it actually was an official publication made here in town, was this booklet called War Poems for Children. And it was published in 1918. It had 11 poems in it. And it was a booklet that was to be sold to raise money for the war effort. And the museum, in digging around in our collections, happens to have a copy of it, which was very exciting because it wasn't under her name. It was in a completely different collection, and I don't know how I happened on it, but I'm very fortunate that I did. And so I'll have it up here if anybody wants to look at it a little bit later, but I mean, it's in very good shape. Our librarian was very nice and loaned it to me so I could bring it out tonight. But I want to read one of her poems from that because I think it really illustrates that love of creativity and how much impact that her mom and her grandmother's handwork had on her. And it's called Just Knitting Squares. I'm a little Red Cross girl. See my uniform? I'm knitting for soldier boys, something nice and warm. Grandma showed me how to knit. Her needles, they just fly. I can't make mine click at all, no matter how I try. Grandma knits and knits on socks and says someday I can. But now I'm knitting on a quilt for some sick soldier man. And I have no idea who the little girl is. She's very cute. I love her. You guys know?
Yeah, that's my mother.
Really? What's her name?
Mary Margaret O'Malley.
Mary Margaret O'Malley. Oh, that is awesome. Tell me that later. I want to write that down so I get that in there. That's so cool. I'm excited. I learn something new every time I do these programs. And so, just like this poem, like I said, much of her things were published locally, but she also published a few works in national magazines, like Kindergarten Primary that I showed you earlier. But she also had a few poems here, real short, cute little poems, as she was a kindergarten teacher. The Man of the Moon, Gardening, After Play. I like how these list her address here in town, so we can kind of follow where she was living. She even continued publishing in kindergarten magazines after she was no longer a teacher. So this one's called Toy Gazing, When Spring Comes. And she got some major national recognition when she published in St. Nicholas magazine. This poem that I did not find in the Panagraph called Minding, I found it in the Wilkes-Barre Record in Pennsylvania. So I'm wondering if maybe it was published there because they still had Kessler family members there in the area. But the Panagraph did report that she was published in St. Nicholas magazine. She also was published in Child Life, The Grade Teacher, The Instructor, the Chicago Tribune, and the Christian Science Monitor. Now in 1919, after just about 4 years at the day nursery, she left and began her long career at Withers Public Library. And I'm pretty sure I've been able to piece together how she ended up at Withers Public Library. This woman right here, Miss Nellie Parham, who was the head librarian for a long time here at Withers. I hear some laughter. She actually was on the day nursery board. And I, just looking at their names and similar stories throughout Kessler's time there, I'm pretty sure that she picked up on Louise's activities there and how good she might be for Withers Public Library. And around 1918, the children's librarian at the time, Marion Wallace, abruptly left. There's no reason given, but she was gone. They had an interim, and then here comes Louise to fill her spot. And Miss Parham, she, in 1916, the library really wanted to expand its children's department. They really wanted to get more young people in the library, using the library, and active in reading. And so they started working on that. Well, I believe that because of Kessler's work at the day nursery and their interaction together, that's how she ended up here. And it really, no matter how modest Louise was, it really was her that helped expand what they did here for kids so very much. And I mean, you can find story after story after story about all the activities that she did throughout her time here. This is a really nice inside image of Withers Public Library that Bloomington Public was kind enough to let me use. There's not a whole lot of inside images of Withers Library. Unfortunately, the pantograph, before they started taking their own photos, used United photos, and those don't really exist anymore. So those early photos that you see in the pantograph, that's all we have is what's in the pantograph. But even though Kessler no longer worked with the day nursery officially, she never quit helping out. She would work with events, she would plan things for the kids. This one in particular, she was participating in the Western Avenue Community Center summer program at the day nursery. Ms. Kessler is right here in the center, and Ms. Parham is on the right, and they're both helping out at that program. And this was in June 1929. And she also didn't leave her life as a teacher completely. All the schools in town had library branches from Withers Public Library. And so it was up to Miss Kessler to check on them, to get them new books. And so she always had her hands kind of in the schools as well. But she was very active in local educational organizations, so she never left that part of her life behind. And some of her earliest activities that she did with the library were plays and pageants, which she wrote herself. Her first play that they put on was called The Twins. It was performed at Withers Park with 60 children, and the pantograph reported that a great throng of people watched from nearby streets as children went through their actions. Later that year, there was a Halloween pageant called The Witch's Wand, which was so decidedly a hit, they had to perform it 3 times instead of the 2 that had been scheduled. Under Kessler's charge, the library became a mecca for little folk. She had something for every kid that walked through that door. She had lectures for boys on Saturday nights, although Saturday night lecture for a little boy, I don't know about that. Birdhouse competitions. She had activities for girls beyond the 5th grade in the winter. She had instructive games. She created special exhibits for children that were displayed throughout the library. She had game and story hours in the summer months. And she had picture shows with accompanying stories for kids in 1st through 2nd grade, or 4th grade, excuse me. And the diversity of the activities she created for children was a credit to the originality that she brought with her as she began working at the library. And a testament to all these things that she was doing was the increase, the exponential increase in how many books were being checked out. In 1919, when she started at the library, 34,367 books were checked out by students. 1940, a little over 20 years later, 126,859 books. I mean, that's an amazing thing. But as modest as she was, she gave much of the credit to Miss Parham, since it was she who, in 1916, really started promoting growing the children's section. But Kessler deserves just as much recognition for making that 20-year dream come true, because she was a major driving force behind that increase in kids using the library. Another way that Kessler helped get literacy into students' minds was, oops, that's just another image of another activity. This is the boys' club. Miss Kessler directs their activities for the reading club, and that's in 1934. They look like they're having a good time there. And this is a group of the librarians here at Withers. And we have Miss Kessler back here. It's about 1926, so she's been working at the library about 7 years. And I believe that's Miss Parham up front. They didn't have all the names ordered on the back, so I was kind of flipping between the two photos to figure out who was who.
The one on the right, on the top row, is Miss Abraham, who
The-
was
okay.
the reference librarian for many, many years.
Miss Abraham, the
Miss
reference
Abraham.
librarian. I think her and Louise started about the same time,
Probably.
from what I remember. And I
It's a
just-
nice looking group of women.
It is! I love this picture. Very fashionable 20s ladies. I love the little bob haircuts on some of them too. But like I said, Kessler, she found ways outside the library to get students more interested in reading, and one of them was the pantograph. And some of you may remember there was a junior pantograph once upon a time long ago. Well, it started not as a junior pantograph, but our juvenile page, or our weekend juvenile page. Plenty of different names each and every year they had that newspaper in its early days. And it began in 1922. It only ran during the school year, September through May, and it published on Saturdays. It was one page, chocked full of things written by students, things written by Kessler, poems, activities, gossip at the schools, all that good stuff. And Kessler would contribute a weekly library corner. So she would give suggested books to students, what they should be reading, or things that they would like to read. And it was in September of 1923 when they brought the paper back for a second year that they had Miss Kessler edit that section of the newspaper. And it was said that the juvenile pantograph was conducted by boys and girls of Bloomington, Normal, and Central Illinois, and published every Saturday during the school year. It included short stories written by local students, crossword puzzles, riddles, and news from local schools. And of course, Kessler herself wrote and contributed a lot of the short stories that were included. And some of these are some of the titles of her stories. One in particular I like is this one called The Magic Key. And it's about a little girl who couldn't understand why the other girls in school did not want to be her friend. Well, her teacher informed her that she was not very friendly to them. Her attitude was very off-putting. And she needed to make more of an effort herself in order to make friends. But her teacher gave her this magic key to friendship. And so she could use this key to unlock the door and hopefully get more friends. Well, the moral of the story is you have to put forth the effort yourself. And the little girl changed her attitude, and there she had friends and was allowed to join the girls' basketball team too. Another interesting story is called Dixie's Punishment. That's a very serious title. Dixie and her little sister were playing in her room one day, and little sister ended up breaking Dixie's favorite pitcher. And Dixie was very upset and decided to punish her little sister. And her little sister's like, well, it was an accident. Mother doesn't punish us if it's accidents. And Dixie said, it doesn't matter. It was not an accident, so you're not going to talk all day long. And made her sister go all day without talking. Well, her mother found out about this, and then in turn made Dixie not talk all day long. And the moral of that story was that the punishment should fit the crime. And this is just some more things from the pantograph. We have a New Year's greeting from the library that she's telling stories to the junior club. And Louise only edited the junior pantograph for about 4 years, 3-4 years. But she never quit contributing. She always would help with contests. She would still continue to submit stories. There was always a library corner where she would suggest books. And it's not really clear why she no longer was editing the pantograph, junior pantograph. Around May of 1926, they completely reformatted that section of the paper. And I kind of think that maybe since they started publishing it every Saturday for the entire year, that maybe it became a little too much for Kessler, or maybe because it was more contest oriented, they had a kids club involved, that maybe that just really wasn't for Kessler, or simply the paper could have just asked her to leave. But like I said, she kept contributing to the newspaper even after she was no longer editing it. She would have book puzzles, and she would always have the answer to the previous puzzle, so you could figure it out. I tried answering these puzzles. I have no idea what the books are that she's talking about, so I clearly need to do my homework and read more. And then, again, more and more activities at the library. All during this time, she was editing, she was writing, and she was still coming up with these great activities at the library. This one right here is the Spring Festival of Books in May 1941. She worked with the Bloomington Garden Club to create this garden of books, which I think is really cute. In National Book Week 1931, the theme was International Friendship. So she arranged colorful displays featuring different destinations from around the world, and then at each destination there was a suggested book that once the book week was over, kids could check out and read about that country that they wanted to explore. This one right here is Book Week 43, Building the Future with Books. We have a couple little girls here checking out what interesting things there are. I see a book on igloos there and fighting planes. During the war years, as you can imagine, there were plenty of books with a military theme in them. National Book Week 1940 was Good Books, Good Friends, and she actually built little mini libraries for suggestions on what your library should look like at home. She had summer reading clubs where you were to finish 8 books in 6 weeks and you would get a diploma. She had music on a Victrola that had been donated to the children's department. And this one is from the scrapbook here. No idea who the boys are, but they look like they're listening to some good music there. They had a kite building contest organized with the Municipal Recreation Board in 1930, and she actually had artisan guilds here for a few years. She had 4 different guilds kids could choose to belong to. There was a craftsman guild, a poets guild, a sculptors guild, and an artist guild. And to be a member of the guild, children could display their creations in the children's room, and their poetry, if they were in the Poets Guild, would be submitted in the poetry booklet that was created for the Spring Festival of Books. She also had poetry contests in schools. This was my favorite that I looked at in these wonderful books here, these silhouette books that some of the kids' poems ended up in. And I just, some kind of, I don't know, nightmare, or maybe it's the Sandman with root beer. I'm not sure, but it was just a really cute drawing associated with this poem called Nighttime. And this little boy is from Trinity Lutheran School. And then art show and tell. She had something for any age, any interest. She just wanted to find something that children could latch onto and explore books in their own way. We have a fun gala day with toys at the library. So all the kids were encouraged to bring a toy with them. So we have a nice collection of dolls with the girls here for the toy parade. They had a toy parade in the library that day. And then the boys, some with dolls, a drum. This guy's got like a squirrel maybe. He's got an airplane and a sailor hat. And then here, just some shots of kids. This was the cutest caption here. Tim Turner is only 3, this little boy right here, but he's a regular visitor to the library. He chooses his own books and prefers adventure stories about airplanes, trains, and fire engines. And then here's our McNabb kids again. They're picking out some favorites from the 100 new children's books on display during the Spring Festival at Withers Library. This one right here was in the scrapbook, and it was from a children's Valentine contest in 1951. This would have been just a year before Kessler retired. But what they did is they sent these contest cards to each school to see, want these kids to design Valentines, and then they'd be displayed in the library. I think it said only 14 Valentines were entered, but 200 children placed votes as to what was the best Valentine. So I think that's really cute. This one right here, I was super excited to find this photo because this story is in the book, and it's about the Christmas trees at Withers Public Library. Louise told the story that every year, for weeks before Christmas, the library staff would decorate the entire library, and it would be a different theme for the tree every year. But this one in particular, this was at the end of World War II, and if you'll notice, the trees have stars on them. Now it's hard to tell in black and white, but these stars are two different colors. There are blue stars and gold stars. And what Miss Kessler did is she invited all the school children in Bloomington to send in the names of their fathers and their brothers who had served during World War II. And she got 550 names sent into her. And they cut out 550 blue stars, and Miss Kessler handwrote the names of each soldier and his rank and where he served on each one of those stars in white lettering. And then the reference librarian, Miss Abraham, she provided the names of McLean County residents who died during World War II, and there was 150 of them that went on the gold stars that were hung on the tree. The tree was all white, and it lasted the entire season, and the children loved this tree so much that when the tree came down on New Year's Day, 1946, many of the kids came back and asked for the stars so they could send them to their family that was still serving overseas. I got so excited when I found this photo because it was just the coolest thing that was evidence of her really neat story. Oh, and I almost forgot, she wrote a poem about this tree, and I will share that with you. So this is just called Library Christmas Tree, 1945. I am a Christmas tree, high, high, the star of peace I hold, and cradled in my branches lie the service stars of blue and gold. O star of peace, well do I know, these smaller stars of gold and blue combine their sacrificial glow to beam illustriously in you. So proudly, thankfully I shine, a glorious Christmas tree, Christ's tree, O star, no symbol more divine have I upheld since Calvary. And this one I threw in here because it was a fun photo. They had a tea on the anniversary of two librarians. Kessler is in the center here, and then this one is Miss Abraham. And over 200 guests attended that tea in the afternoon on January 22nd. Unless I saw the date, it kind of fooled me because it felt very much like springtime in that photo. So they must have been wearing those nice coats that they had on the other picture. Poetry contests were another big part of Kessler's career here. And it was during the war era. She wanted to do something to help lift people up because it was a dark and scary time. She was having these thoughts she remembered right after Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. If this library could only create a little beauty in the lives of patrons to offset the horrors of war, it would help perhaps a little bit. And so she decided original poetry was the answer because it brought her so much joy that she felt it would bring other people joy. And so May 1st, 1942, Kessler, very timidly, she recalled, hung up 10 original poems on a bulletin board in the corner of the main library room. I guess she didn't have very much confidence in herself. And she was astounded by all the votes people cast in that ballot box that she placed right below there. She asked people to vote for their 3 favorites, and then she would tally the votes, and the 3 best would win. And again, she was just astounded how excited people got over this little simple thing. And so she did a few of those, and she got such a response, she decided I'd better do this more frequently. So she did it on the 1st and the 15th of every month until 1946. That's a lot of poetry and poems. And then they started announcing the winners of the poems in the pantograph. As you can see here, there's a few of the winners. These are later, again from the scrapbooks here. And then in 1943, they actually started announcing on the radio on WJBC locally. And and they started reading the winning poems on JBC. And unfortunately, none of those audio recordings exist anymore. I did contact them. I was like, maybe they have some somewhere deep down in a dark basement. But
They may not have been recorded.
well, no, that's true. They said those early years, probably not, but it was a shot in the dark, but still very cool, because she would often read the poems herself on the radio. So that would have just been really cool to hear what she actually sounded like. And once they started having those poems read on the radio, they started getting submissions from further and further away. She received poems from all throughout central Illinois, and places like in Mississippi, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, even had soldiers who had once been stationed here that would keep sending her poems from wherever they were, because they enjoyed the poetry contest so much. And she received so many letters from all the people that submitted, that even the judges were sending her letters about how much they appreciated being allowed to judge, and also that she was doing this. There was very much sincere appreciation that she did these contests, and the library has a lot of those letters in their scrapbooks. I felt like I didn't even want to breathe when I'm looking through those letters. It was really, really neat to see that they still had them. One woman who submitted a letter with her poem touched Kessler's heart so much that, in her own words, stopped all her private grumblings about how much of an amount of work it took to prepare the poems for the Poetry Corner every time. The author wished to express gratitude for the joy you have given me, and mine is indeed deeply felt. The woman told Kessler that her poetry program and poetic insight were like a lantern in the dark during these troubled times. This particular man right here, Mr. Charles Innes, he has a very neat story that Karen put me on. Mr. Innes was a regular submitter, but he was also completely blind. And so a lot of times he would have his neighbor, Mrs. Wazinski, who also lived in Bellflower, submit his poems for him, but he typed some of these letters up himself, and really appreciated all that Clara did, but also appreciated that she took the time to write him back. Because he lived by himself in a big house, so it didn't sound like he may have had much interaction with anybody other than his neighbors. So that really, touched him and her too, because she saved quite a few of his letters. During the whole run of the poetry contest, she received 850 poems from 1942 to January 1st, 1946, when the last contest was held. And the scrapbooks here, they don't contain many of the poems, but they do contain the letters that people had submitted with their poems. So that's a neat little look into how people really felt about her contest, and Ms. Kessler herself. And this is the lady I was talking about at the very beginning, the actress of stage and screen, Miss Jane Cowell. I love this picture of her with the very dramatic fur and very movie starish. But she had actually read some of Kessler's poetry in a newspaper. And she did a radio interview in New York and just started talking about librarians and Kessler. And she said that she could tell that Kessler's poems were written by someone who knows and loves children and is vitally interested in them, someone who is helping to shape their lives by every book she recommends. There are thousands of Miss Kesslers here in America who work in our public libraries, who are among our most potent allies in the fight to make this kind of country what we want it to be. So she was basically telling people it's the librarians that are the ones that are helping our students. Not knocking teachers either, but she really felt librarians were the ones that were opening doors for kids. And finally, what I like to think is one of her masterpieces here was Hometown in the Corn Belt. And I kind of happened on these in our library a number of years ago, and I started flipping through them when I was doing research for Cemetery Walk, and I was like, why didn't I know about these all along? I mean, it was like gold, and our librarians just kind of like, oh yeah, and they're on that shelf. It's okay, and I use these so very much. And it's a 5-volume history that was created in honor of the centennial of Bloomington in 1950. And it was, in her words, an attempt to recapture those days of my childhood and make them live again. And the 5 volumes each have a different theme. Volume 1 is Hometown Childhood. Volume 2 is Hometown Entertainments. Volume 3 is Hometown Personalities. So I'd like to think if they make another one of these, Bill Flick will be in it. Number 4 is For the People, Public Institutions. And number 5 is Hometown Clubs and Organization. It took her, from what I can tell, 4 to 5 years to gather all the stories for this book. And she did not alter any of the submissions. They're all original to what the writers sent to her. The only thing she did is she collected them all, she compiled them, and then she retyped them into two sets. There are only 2 sets of this ever. One is here at Bloomington Public Library, and the other was given to, at that time known as the McLean County Historical Society, which is the museum, and both of us still have it, and anybody can look at them. And they, like I said, are a huge resource for history. Contributors to these books include Adlai Stevenson II, Florence Pfeiffer Bohr, Clara Bryan, Lafayette Funk, Charles Kirkpatrick, Fannie Livingston Oakes, and many, many more. She also admitted that this project just scratched the surface. She said she wanted to include more, that this wasn't even everything she wanted to include because she couldn't find the authors that she wanted to include everything that she wanted. The pantograph proclaimed that every citizen needs to know the background of his community. Every school should have authentic sources for teaching. And these books, like I said, continue to be a resource for history to this day. Now, even though Kessler retired, and this is a picture during the tea they had when the book was published. And you can see these books
That's Phyllis right
are
there.
right here.
Right.
Phyllis?
Is right here?
Yeah. That's all right.
Type that.
You helped type it? Oh my gosh. Well, your copy's here, and I believe this is the museum's copy over here, because our copy is green, and this one here is black. So that's very cool. Now, like I said, Kessler, even though she retired from Withers Public Library in 1952, she didn't stop. She did not stop writing. She did not stop being active in the community, and she certainly did not stop promoting literacy for children. She remained very active the rest of her life. Upon her retirement, Miss Nellie Parham, who had hired her, stated that Kessler's background as a kindergarten teacher and her training, her knowledge and love of children's literature were the greatest assets to the children's room. Her service to the children and parents of this community over the years cannot be estimated. She never ceased in her efforts to present the very best in children's literature or to encourage its enjoyment. And kind of as an end to our talk about Louise Kessler, we portrayed her at our cemetery walk last year. And so I have a clip of her performance. The actress's name is Devin Lovell. She's a local actress here in town. You may have seen her at Heartland Theater, among other places. And I mean, to me, I think she did a fabulous job as Miss Kessler, from everything that I've read, from everything that I know about her. But I will let the experts who are in the front row tell me otherwise. But I thought I would share this for those of you who may not have been able to make it to the cemetery walk. I know, Kathleen, you wrote the script, right? Yeah. Kathleen Kirk wrote the script, and our theater partner, Illinois Voices Theaters, who we work with the cemetery walk each and every year. So without further, let's see if I can make this all work now. Oh, no. Oh, technology. Oh, I think I know what the problem is.
Hard of hearing now, so I always feel like I'm shouting and then discover
There we go.
Let's go meet Miss Kessler now. Can you all hear me? I'm a bit hard of hearing now, so I always feel like I'm shouting and then discover I wasn't loud enough. How kind of you to come hear my poems. I know most people avoid poetry readings. Unless the poets are children, then we're charmed by their work. I was certainly charmed by children's writings and drawings when I was the editor of the Junior Pantograph. Of course, I was not so charmed by their frequent inability to remember the simplest of rules in submitting their work to the paper. All I needed really was the child's name, address, grade, school, and a signature of a parent or a teacher. You could remember that, couldn't you? It takes very little time for each child to include this information, but if it's missing, it takes the junior editor a very long time to look it up. And many times the contribution must be thrown away entirely. Sometimes a boy or girl just misses getting a prize because one of these facts is missing. And it wasn't just the children. When I conducted poetry contests for adults, I thought the rules were very clear indeed. Local poets only. But we received submissions from out of state that had to be returned unread. What I don't understand is, how can you be a writer if you're not a reader? Reading is my favorite pastime, as it should be, since I'm a children's librarian. I wrote poems, plays, children's stories, songs. My sister Frances and I wrote songs together. She wrote the music, I the lyrics. Frances inherited the musical talent. I inherited my father's shyness and his attention to detail, which suited me as a librarian, and him as a druggist. When my father was 9 years old, he was given a large bell one morning and told to ring it and call out, "Auction at Kessler's today, auction, auction." He rang the bell, but he was too shy to say a single word. My father worked in his father's drugstore in Warren, Illinois, and then took a job in Normal and eventually had a place of his own. By coincidence, Rachel Crothers' father, Dr. Eli Crothers, also had a drugstore in town. Both Rachel and I wrote plays, but she's the famous one. I was happy to stay at home and contribute to the arts and education in my own community while she went off to New York. I did have a little renown, though. My one-act plays won prizes in local contests, and early on, I had a poem published in St. Nicholas magazine, where the famous poet Edna St. Vincent Millay got her start. I had poems published in the Chicago Tribune, and in New York on the radio, an actress said they were written by someone who knows and loves children, and who is vitally interested in them, someone who helps shape their lives by every book she recommends. I am vitally interested in the lives of children. I've been so worried about the minds and imaginations of children ever since the era of directed play began. Children are told how to play and what to do during play periods. And at the same time, modern science, with its electrical and mechanical toys, its radio, moving pictures, and automobiles, offers only passive entertainment. They sit and listen, sit and look, sit and ride. Every child needs moments of freedom during the day, for reading and thinking, time for the imagination to grow. Children need green spaces like Withers Park for free and active play in the beauty of nature. And they need interior ways to find beauty. The beauty of spirit and good literature. The beauty of inspiration in the fine arts. The beauty of fulfillment and personal accomplishment. What has been my dream for many years is a children's creative arts building that has all the materials for creative expression and a place for them to exhibit their final work. The I in every child is important. Given the space and the tools for expression, children will develop idealism, imagination, ingenuity, initiative, inventiveness, industry, and independence. All fine attributes that happen to begin with the letter I, for the building of a better Bloomington tomorrow. Oh, you came for a poetry reading. You got something else instead, part memoir, part lecture. Well, let me close with a brief poem that helps make my point. When I was a little girl, my grandmother taught me knitting, sewing, and tatting, and I knitted blankets for the soldiers in World War I. I also wrote a book of children's war poems to help raise war funds. On the front of the book is a little girl in a Red Cross nurse's uniform. Here's my poem. I'm a little Red Cross girl. See my uniform? I'm knitting for the soldier boys, something nice and warm. Grandma showed me how to knit. Her needles, they just fly. I can't make mine click at all, no matter how I try. Grandma knits and knits on socks and says someday I can. But now I'm knitting on a quilt for some sick soldier man. It doesn't matter if I was never as famous as Rachel Crothers. I know I did something worthwhile with my life, whether it was knitting a blanket for a soldier, writing a poem, recommending a book for a child, or writing a letter to the editor in favor of saving Withers Park when the town threatened to take the land. But it did help to hear Jane Cowell say on the radio. And always remember, there are thousands of Miss Kesslers in America. Yes, those who work in our public libraries are our most potent allies in the fight to make this the kind of country we want it to be. Thank you.
So I think she put it best that way. I will close with this, that even though Louise never married, she didn't have any children of her own, I like to think that she thought of all the children at the library, and the schools where she taught were very much her own, because it is clear that she put so much passion and love and joy into sharing literature and poetry with all of them. So I think, like Devin said when she ended her monologue, and like Kathleen wrote, that she very much felt that her life was fulfilled with what she did as a librarian. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Did you run across any other hints that she really wasn't that impressed with Rachel Crothers? Or,
Well,
or that it really did bother her that Rachel Crothers was rich and famous and she wasn't?
I don't think so. We had a little bit of theatrical license with our Cemetery Walk productions there, so I didn't